You've landed on The Substance. I'm your host, Philip Marinello, saying, welcome back and Merry Christmas season. Here at The Substance, we're looking to have conversations that help us all better appreciate goodness, truth, and beauty. Previous guests include folks like Esau McCulley, Karen Swallow Pryor, multi-hyphenate artist Propaganda, Josh Nadeau, who runs the Sword and Pencil Instagram account, and Kaitlyn Schiess. Today, we are very happy to welcome Reverend Ben Lansing to the show. Ben is a professional artist and an Anglican deacon, and very recently, with our friends over at IVP, he put out a wonderful devotional art book that goes along with his Our Church Speaks account. It's wonderful art that he does. The subtitle for the book is An Illustrated Devotional of Saints from Every Era and Place, and it really does live up to that. Christianity is not a modern Western religion. It's a global historical religion with lots of history and legacy that is easy to forget, especially when we're broken up into our little sects and clubs. So this is a wonderful resource, and I had a fantastic time talking with him, and very excited to share that show with you. If you like the show, if you've been listening for a while and you haven't yet, we would appreciate it very greatly if whatever app you're on, you hit the 5-star button. If you're listening on Apple, take a minute, write us a quick review. That helps us quite a bit. Also, I'll tell you at the top, if you have any suggestions for guests, topics, films to cover in future shows, you can send us an email or a voice note to thesubstancepod@gmail.com, and we would love to hear from you. Now, on to the show. We'll maybe talk about it during the show. So usually Krista or whoever always sends me a copy, and it's great, but I don't know if it's because I messaged you early, like when it was announced and you sent somebody, and we're on the list, and I told Krista we were probably talking to you. But over the last couple of weeks, I now have I know 3 copies. Usually I email Krista when I have an email or an episode coming up on email. I go, hey, can we get a giveaway set up? But now I can run my own giveaways.
I love it.
Like, I got the second one and I was like, oh, that's funny. And then I got a third one a week later and I was like, okay, what's going on? Like, is this a joke? But I thought my wife thought that was very funny. And she's already like, I love that you're doing all this, but we have a lot of books and we're getting some movies now too. It's great, but our space is finite. But I just thought that was hilarious.
Yeah. Or your Christmas shopping's already done, with all those books.
That's true. This is a great addition. Like, I love a hardback book, and I really, really love a book that doesn't have a dust jacket. It's just printed on to the hardcover itself, so you don't have to worry about that at all.
Yep. I was thrilled with it when it came out. They described what it was going to look like as far as the production of the physical book itself, and I thought that sounds good. And then I saw it, and the colors were more vivid than I was expecting. I'm just used to seeing this art online, so seeing it in print was like,
IVP
whoa.
does a phenomenal job.
They do.
I've got a lot of my I did this episode a long time ago. I have a lot of this is my podcasting area of my basement, and I have a lot of the materials that I've used before. This was, several months ago, but this one I still have here just because I read it when it came out. But just the covers, whoever they have, I forgot his name. I actually think I might do an episode with just him sometime. The design team at IVP is phenomenal.
Oh, you should. Yeah, it is an amazing team. I was impressed with working with them from the start. Like, they knew the vision for Our Church Speaks from the beginning, and they were just affirming that the whole time. So I've heard people say, oh, you really have to fight for your vision, for your idea for the book, because people will take it in all different directions. And
Sure.
that just was not the case. Like, they could in some ways articulate the vision to me in ways that I hadn't thought of before, but were so consistent with why I was doing the project. So it was great.
With you, I feel like you really have a leg up in much of the content is already out there, and it's more a job of editing and organizing versus here's a great idea, here's a healthy skeleton, and now we need to fill this out as a book,
right?
Because the visual art is so much a part of it, and you've been doing that for ages and your feed is full of it. Like, you've already done a lot of the work, but then it's putting it together and then adding to it. That I would imagine that would make the process a lot smoother than selling a really great pitch and then going, okay, now I
Yep,
have what, 8 months or a year to turn in a book.
that's very true. How did you discover the account?
I mean, faith and art
Yep,
are two big things in my life, and I'm sure I don't know.
just kind of popped up in your feed. The algorithms found you.
The algorithms did, and I mean, no, this was way before IVP. How long's your account been going on Instagram?
Um, it's been going since early 2021.
Okay. I mean, I could have just found it early on. I mean, I'm looking at some of the folks who we share in common, and two of them are significant artists: Josh Nadeau, who runs the Sword and Pencil account, and
Yep,
Josh Thiessen, the Canadian artist who does a lot of wildlife stuff.
yep.
I've internet friends with both those guys and have had them both on the show before, past and future guests. And maybe it was them. Like, I love having the theologians, teachers, academics, and then like the activists, and then the artists, like the whole kind of gamut. Primarily of faith, but I mean, sometimes we have on people who are just out there doing good
Doing
as
good stuff.
well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Which
love that.
a lot of the stuff on your account, I have a wide variety of people who follow me personally and the show. And whenever I've shared your stuff, like the people who are doing, that's kind of the brand of the show. Like, when you really are getting at the heart of the truth and the substance of a lot of these principles, like, they are good and beautiful things that most people can agree on. It's
Yep.
when you get into beating people over the head with like tribal type stuff is where it gets hairy. But like the
Yeah, yeah.
actual teachings of Jesus, when you put them up with a nice image and a quote, they're like, yeah, like I wish a lot of the people who don't identify as people of faith see that and go, I wish that's what my experience of people of faith was.
Yeah. But by the way, I'm noticing, how's my audio? Is it good? I'm noticing that your, audio seems to be really strong with the
Okay.
sound bars, but mine I don't know if you can see it too, but mine's a little
Your sound bars are looking great on my end, and I can
good.
hear you clearly. If you want to turn up your mic a little, please go ahead. I At the time of recording, the episode I just published was one I recorded a long time ago, and our audios were not terribly equal. And I felt I listened to it again today, and it's like, oof, good content. Sound editing. I want to try to figure out the levels a little bit better, but both of our sound levels are looking pretty good to me. But I can also
Cool.
mess with that. I'm getting slightly more competent as I go on with that editing.
I thought the latest episode sounded just fine, so
Excellent.
I
Well,
was listening
thank
to it
you.
earlier today, so yeah, it's great.
So I guess because I followed your account for quite a while, your what you're doing in the book is very specific and clear. But I'd just love to hear, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear, like folks who maybe aren't familiar with you personally, the guy behind this, like briefly, like how much ever detail you want to do, like the interest in art, the devotion of the faith, and kind of how those two came together. We kind of love to hear that origin story.
Yeah, so I'm an artist, and, I draw for a living, so I'm also fascinated with church history, and I have been for quite a few years. I've found studying church history to be very grounding to me, especially in uncertain times and with questions of my own faith.
Oh yeah.
And so, just knowing that the work that God's been doing in the world is so much bigger than just my individual faith story. So much bigger than my ability to muster up, enough good feelings. But instead, this is a story that goes back through 20 centuries of the church. And as I've been reading these many people from every era and place, that's the subtitle of our book is a devotional of saints from every era and place. I was just thinking, how could I maybe package the core of what is encouraging me, and do it through my art in a way that's quickly accessible, quickly grasped to someone who may not even know that this content could be beneficial. Just sort of get their feet wet and maybe whet their appetite for more.
No, I think the idea of saints from every era and every place is very comforting and exciting. I mean, I'll
Yeah.
speak personally. I love that because just what you said, through the last several years, particularly the last handful of years, it's been really interesting kind of reckoning with uh, objective, like propositional beliefs and kind of organized religious effect and realities and things like that. And I have found it very comforting to just kind of zoom out and just what you said, remember that God works in many ways and has worked in time since time began all over the place. Like it's not my context, my upbringing, my little tiny chunk of my experience. Like that's not all of it.
Yeah.
And it's been very helpful for me. And a lot of people I know in the deconstruction, reconstruction, whatever you want to call it, like figuring out what you believe, like making your faith your own. A
Hmm.
lot of the people who I see who appear to be, and the folks who I know personally, the ones who really seem to be the most stable and strong, have a very strong sense of like the like their role in the global historical church, not an
Hmm.
inflated view of like the finite small group of people who we're in going like we're the only right ones, everyone else is wrong, and we need to fight them. Like I've just found that to be such a helpful point of view to be able to kind of go, how has God worked in the past and currently in other environments than my own?
Yeah. Uh, that's exactly what my heart was wanting to peer over the edge of my own individual experience and my own individual churches that I've been to, and to see what's sort of the big picture, pull the camera out a bit. And I find that immensely encouraging. I mean, there's a number of different ways to view history, and you can view it through a cynical lens of just people fighting and squabbling. But really, if you view it through the lens of what Christ has been doing for 20 centuries, I think there's an immense amount of encouragement to be found there. And an essay that really inspired this project is called On the Reading of Old Books by C.S. Lewis. And in that essay, he talks about people of a variety of different denominations and church traditions that have inspired him. And he's talking about how before he himself was a Christian, he could see all these different types of Christian groups, and what he saw was this immense formidable unity, that despite all of the very important nuances that are between the different denominations and traditions, there's still this immense formidable unity, he called it, that's held by Christians of all different stripes in their common beliefs. And he wrote the book Mere Christianity, so that's kind of what he's hinting at. But he's
Which is a
also
book that most people can agree on is pretty good.
yeah. I would think so, but these days people can disagree about just about anything. But C.S. Lewis
That's fine. That's their prerogative.
yes, that's true. But C.S. Lewis makes sure that he's saying, I'm not talking about what he calls an insipid interdenominational transparency. Like, he's not trying to downplay the fact that there are disagreements within the Christian family, but that with like any family, we have our squabbles and our disagreements, but overall, we're still family. If you're baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, you're baptized into a family. And so this Our Church Speaks art series, it's sort of my attempt to create a family photo album in a sense.
Oh,
Here
I like that.
here's the people, and this family isn't from just one particular region. Christianity is the most diverse religion and has been since the beginning. And sometimes we can forget that. And one way for me to try to reinforce that reality and make sure that we come to terms with that reality is just to look at the faces, the cultures, the centuries that all these people have come from. and see that in every time and place, God's been at work. So,
So, according to the back of the book and your various online platforms, you're currently a deacon in the Anglican denomination. Is
yes,
that is that where you were raised and kind of grew up, or have you transitioned over to Anglicanism?
yeah, I was raised in Baptist charismatic backgrounds,
Okay,
and probably in my 20s started asking questions about the origins of the faith. Was reading scripture and studying church history, asking a lot of questions. And I've already referenced C.S. Lewis before. I was reading a lot of C.S. Lewis, and he was pointing me to some good sources of primary sources from church history. Um, and I started to engage with a tradition and really a prayer tradition that was more rooted in the ancient practices of the church. And so Anglicanism's a great place for that. Um, and really, our church speaks isn't intended to be an apologetic for the Anglican tradition, but
sure.
The Anglican tradition is a great place to have sort of a touch point with any different variety of different denominations. So,
I found that to be the
yeah.
case. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm currently a member of a non-denominational church, but I remember what is it now at this point? I am so bad at time, but longtime listeners will know. And if you're familiar with the IVP catalog, you'll see the what are they called? The Fullness of Time, the little small booklets
Oh,
that they
yeah.
put out. I really love those. We've had a number of the authors on, but the first one was Esau McCulley with Lent, and then the second one was Bishop Alvarez with Pentecost, and those were both really wonderful books and really wonderful just conversations. And after the Lent, because the church I grew up in, the church that I currently attend, neither one of them really observe the church calendar, like, and I don't really think you can call like Easter and Christmas like acknowledging like giant holidays, like observing the church calendar. But I went
Tip of the iceberg.
to Lenten services at a local Anglican church after I read Esau's book, because that came out right before Lent.
Right.
And I've gone every like 2 or 3 years since, how many ever years it's been. And every now and then I'll just pop in, and it does feel like a nice connection point.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the liturgical calendar, I have found, just reframes time in a way that is helping me unlearn a lot of the bad cultural habits that come from living in our
Yes.
contemporary society.
So I'll say
And
I know that
yeah,
some of our listeners specifically who are now in Anglican churches have said exactly that. Like,
yeah,
one of the things that has become so hard for many people who take their faith seriously and just themselves seriously, and morality and ethics and integrity and things like that, the way a lot of us were taught religion and spirituality have a lot of baggage that we no longer want to have. But then when we try to shed those things, a lot of those environments are kind of held together with man-made things and tribal things, and in a lot of instances unhelpful things that
yeah,
if we actually want to follow the way of Jesus, we need to put off. But then we put them off, and then we're like, okay, not a whole lot of structure here anymore.
yeah, yeah,
And I found that the church calendar is such a beautiful tool to be like, oh right, like now we are, it's just like any other, it's almost like an exercise like regimen. It's like, okay, we're observing these things now. We are remembering this. We're confessing that. Like, it is kind of a helpful structure to kind of be, and it's time tested. It's not a lot of the non-denominational churches we grew up in were like, oh yeah, this guy a generation or two ago
yeah,
started this church, and here's kind of the things he was into and against. Like, the global historical church has centuries of tradition and time tested, and when you're part
hmm
of those things, like, you are connected in a way that in a lot of these other kind of insular communities you can't have.
yeah. You know, we live in times, I think, that a lot of people feel a certain degree of uncertainty, and you mentioned there's this just a lot of people who are asking good, hard questions about their faith and about the world that they live in. A lot of institutions are being questioned, and
Yeah.
there's deconstruction and all sorts of things. It's just a
And the
feeling that
people who told us to always be reforming did not like it when we started reforming.
yeah. But the liturgical calendar, I think it is this, like you said, time-tested practice that has seen the ebbs and flows of the centuries. It has been observed by Christians through some of the darkest periods of history. I mean, during the bubonic plague, during the world wars, during times that we can't even relate to. These have helped to sustain Christians' faith, Christians' faiths, and it's just such a comfort to me to be rooted in something that is so much older and bigger than whatever the current events of my day can throw at me, whatever new ideas get thrown at me. Really, a dimension of the liturgical calendar is what also helped to inspire the Our Church Speaks art series and subsequently the devotional that's come out. Um, in the liturgical calendar, there's what's called the calendar of saints, and it's this way of commemorating different Christians who have lived through the centuries and remembering them on a specific day. And we have St. Valentine's Day and St. Patrick's Day are two really popular saints'
The big
days.
ones.
The big ones.
Oh, those are also IVP. Have you seen the Ned Bustard books that the IVP kids have? He's got
I
St.
no, I
Patrick,
haven't.
St. Nicholas, St. Valentine, I think.
Oh, that's
Really
great.
gorgeous art. His art looks like those wood carving type deals. They're
Oh,
very
I gotta look
cool.
that up. That sounds amazing. I love that. Yeah, so uh Our Church Speaks isn't a list of my favorite historic Christians. I am literally going through the calendar of saints and I'm drawing these people who church traditions long before me have decided these are people worth remembering. And so I've learned a lot by going through that calendar myself. I'm discovering people, looking up their stories, and then I'm researching when did these people live and how might they have dressed? You know, what people group were they from and what were some customs that I might be able to incorporate into the art itself.
Well,
So,
yeah, in the
yeah.
book itself, I want to talk about a few other things, but in the book itself, I do really love how each saint with their quote is labeled like the time and the place. Like you're talking about
Mhm.
eras and
Mhm.
places, like a ton of countries are mentioned.
Yeah.
Like a wild amount of variety of times and places. It's truly like a universal thing.
Yeah, yeah, that was a really fun part of putting the book together. I wrote this book with my co-author DJ Murata. He wrote the devotional reflections in the book, and I did the art and wrote the history portions. But together, Dan and I and our editor Al at IVP, we created this list. We were trying to get at least one representative in the book from every century of the church. We wanted a good mix of men and women, and we also wanted people from every inhabited continent, like a good mix of all those different things. And that was one of the most fun parts of the whole project. And it was also one of the most difficult because you had to, you know, boot
Put
out
in that
some
work.
people and because maybe we had, for example, there might be too many people from this particular region, so you have to decide, okay, like if we're going to keep it to 52, which was the goal, one for every week of the year. um yeah, it was a very
Who's
fun
getting the
and
boot?
difficult process. Who's getting the boot? Yeah. Exactly. So that was great fun.
So when did, just personally, you said you grew up Baptist charismatic
Yes.
and you're now in the Anglican denomination, like how did, was that college? Was that after college? Like how did that happen?
Oh yeah, that's quite a story actually. So it was after college. For a number of different reasons, by the time I was in my high school years, my family had kind of disengaged from organized church altogether. And this was because of a lot of really abusive situations that they had encountered. They were kind of like, clearly this is not for us. So my parents and my siblings, we in high school, I was meeting for the most part just at home. We would get together and have a little family worship time. Over time, though, more and more people started joining us. They would just send out invites to people who might be interested. And this is all in the early 2000s time period. Um, and so what we would do is we would gather around, we'd sing songs, we'd read scripture, and we would pray. And that was kind of it. And usually what happened is the conversation would kind of fall apart eventually. What was supposed to be worship ended up just kind of becoming talking about current events or whatever.
Sure.
And I think it was becoming clear to everybody something's missing and we don't know what it is. And then we discovered this book, which I think it was self-published. I don't know how we ended up with it, but it was basically saying that house churches need to recapture the ancient practice of the Lord's Supper as part of their meetings. And for us, you know, that hadn't even occurred to us. And I know that sounds crazy that we'd never even thought of that, but we started just having the Lord's Supper. And I really think that's where the beginning of what I would call a sacramental worldview started to build for me because I saw a change that you can't just explain away, that took over the whole group as we began to share in the body and blood of Christ and gather around the word and the table. And, you know, now as an Anglican, there's a number of things we were doing that I would say, yeah, I wouldn't have done it that way then.
Sure.
But the beautiful thing is God is a God of grace. You know, he takes us where we are and he gently leads us to wherever he's taking us. And he blessed that group in some really powerful ways. We were bound together as a community in ways that we weren't before. And we were giving of ourselves and our lives to each other in ways that we weren't before. And it was around that time that I was also starting to say, you know what? There is something about the church that is worth preserving. You know, because before I even had my doubts, I was starting to think, you know, I know I love Jesus, but I don't know if I'm going to be involved in a church long term. I might just be me and
Sure.
Jesus in my Bible and that's it.
Man, so many people right now are in that exact same boat
Yeah.
for a lot of the reasons it sounded like your family did, and just a myriad of reasons. There's like I want to be connected to God. I
Yep.
want to be like living out like the spiritual purpose that like I know I have, but also yikes. I don't know if these
Yeah.
people and organizations that I'm familiar with are really the best way to do that.
That's right. Yeah. So that's exactly right. One thing I began to learn though, as this house church got older, was when you run from the institution, after a while, you become the institution.
That's very true. I mean, all those independent Baptists or independent whatever churches all end up becoming kind of their own little kingdoms, and
Yeah.
yeah, those don't usually go very well.
Yeah. So you can't run from institutions. You end up either being part of one or you become the institution. And that really was convicting to me. It's like, okay, well, if being part of something isn't optional as a Christian, then maybe I need to, I mean, not give blind deference to the organized church, but I was beginning to be ready to kind of dip my toes back in and do it with a certain degree of taking the rose-colored glasses off, but recognizing that God can work within these institutions, these denominations. And when I did that, what I started to do was I started to take a new approach with becoming a member of a local church that was, I think that one was a non-denominational church. It's a beautiful church. And so I was part of that church for a while. And then I was at the same time exploring, like, what do Presbyterians believe? What do Roman Catholics believe? What do Anglicans believe? So listening to all these podcasts from all these different denominations. And in that
Nice.
process, I discovered that an Anglican church was about to be planted in my neighborhood. And
Whoa.
of all the denominations, I can't explain why that one in particular really caught my attention. But when it did, it was this moment where I just felt like God said, I want you to pay attention to this. And talked to my wife about it, and she was like, "Yeah, I think we should pay attention to that." And then we talked to our pastors at the non-denominational church, prayed with them about it, and they said, "We think you should pay attention to this."
Wow, great.
So, that was a very healing thing for me, having witnessed very territorial churches that were very controlling. To have,
Familiar with that, yeah.
yeah, to have some non-denominational pastors say, "You know what? We're gonna missionally send you to help plant a church in a completely different denomination, an Anglican
That's
church."
that is so refreshing and, like,
Yeah.
encouraging to hear. I don't think I have a ton of listeners left at this point. It's been a few years from the previous church I was in, but literally, and I don't mind saying this because it happened, like, I met with the pastor of the previous church I was at when I was just because, like, yeah, membership. Like, I take it seriously. I was like, hey, we're pulling our membership. We're gonna go to this other church. Basically, the attitude was like, like you'll be back, and,
Right.
and I was like, oh wow, like cool guy, like very very normal behavior, but that's so encouraging.
Yeah, they ended up having, the founding pastor of this Anglican church, who actually is now the co-author of my book. Um, they had him come to our non-denominational church, and he came in his, Anglican clerical collar and everything. And we were like, skinny jeans, deep V, non-denom,
This was
hipster shirt.
early 2000s.
This was like 2015, I think.
Oh, okay. Your family left in the early 2000s, and then time had progressed, and
Time
then this happened.
progressed.
Okay,
Yeah.
2015.
Yeah, I should have been
Okay, because I
giving
was
some,
like, man,
year
this
markers.
guy's got an insane skincare routine, or is like a vampire. Then, if that was early 2000s,
No,
got
to
it.
catch us up. So, yeah, early 2000s, my family started doing the house church. I would say by 2010, I had decided I'm gonna re-engage with the institutional church. And by and that's when I joined the non-denominational church, which felt like a huge, huge step for me at that time. And then by 2015, I had heard about this Anglican church that was being planted. So the
And
pastors
you
of the
heard
non
about that on a
through a
podcast?
podcast, yeah.
Wow.
Um, and it was the strangest thing because, I had been listening to so many podcasts, hearing so many different news items. None of them stood out to me in such a way that it felt like God really had just put his finger in my chest and said, "This is something I want you to pay attention to."
Like, this is for you.
Yeah, exactly. So the non-denominational pastors that were my pastors at the time, they had this Anglican church planter come in his clerical collar, and he basically was invited to explain what an Anglican church was. And then these pastors laid their hands on him and there were a few other folks who were planning to go with him to start this church, and they blessed everyone and sent us off in this very missional way, and it was
Wow.
extremely healing for me. It took away a lot of cynicism that I had about, just the church as an institution, and reminded me that God is at work here and he's doing things across whatever little boundaries we can form for ourselves.
Okay, before we get too far away from it, this is a bit of a tangent, but two things on the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
Again, I don't have any concept of time anymore, but not too long ago, we had I don't know if you're familiar, hip hop artist, recording artist, singer, songwriter Flame.
Hmm.
A little while back, he had on some EPs. He's very publicly went over to the Lutheran denomination. What is your kind of in a nutshell thoughts on like the presence of Christ in communion? We've talked about that a few times on the show where I don't know specifically what the Anglican position is, but what has your or what is your position on the presence
Yeah.
in communion?
So Anglicans believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, which we distinguish from the idea of transubstantiation, which is the Roman Catholic view. And transubstantiation is taking uh, metaphysics from Aristotle and applying
Kind of
some very
wild, in my
yeah, I mean,
opinion. Like, I respect people who were taught that and who hold to that. Kind of wild for me.
sure.
That's a bit far,
Well,
respectfully.
it's coming out of the scholastic movement from the Middle Ages, which is a fascinating movement. And a lot of the core logic in the scholastic movement, and this is again what Roman Catholics believe is what I'm talking about now, is the idea that because creation is made by a rational creator, that we can ask questions, logical questions about how things work, and we can maybe learn more than we might think. So people like Thomas Aquinas wrote a lot about like how is Christ physically present in the Eucharist. For Anglicans, though, we more lean towards a more ancient understanding of the real presence of Christ, and really Christians have believed in some form of real presence from the beginning. I mean, you can go
No,
back to the
absolutely.
earliest church fathers.
And the more I learn about real presence, I'm like, yeah, like I, I mean, if you look at it, yeah, like that seems to make sense.
Yeah, we kind of stop at saying Christ is really present, in the Eucharist.
I like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
mystery is totally fine.
Hmm.
We don't need to perfectly understand everything. And then the other, thank you for indulging me on that.
Yeah,
If you have
yeah,
any
sure.
more, feel free. The other thing is, this is just something my wife and I have been talking about because we were raised very particularly. Thoughts on children and age, or just like good principles, like how does your church do that, and what are your thoughts on parents who are going, should like should my how does my child take part in it, especially if kids are interested in like
Hmm.
baptism, Eucharist, like how does that all kind of go together?
Yeah, great question. So the core is in the Anglican tradition, we do practice infant baptism. And by doing so, they are brought into the church. So these children who have been baptized, they have parents, they have godparents who are essentially speaking in faith on behalf of that child until that child can claim that faith for themselves in their confirmation. We have a practice called confirmation, where essentially the child that's been baptized, that is where they uh, claim that faith for themselves by participating in this ancient liturgy where they confirm that they have been instructed in the faith, and they are anointed with oil, and they are tasked to essentially initiate their spirit-filled ministry as a Christian. So usually confirmation happens when the child is um, 12 or older, somewhere around there. Um, where the Eucharist comes in, so there's two different schools of thought. Eucharist, Lord's Supper. Um, and really Anglicans, I've seen Anglican churches go one way or the other. So it's a parish by parish basis, or maybe even a diocese by diocese basis, because we
Okay.
organize ourselves by diocese. Um, you can go with the Roman Catholic view, which is a very ancient view. It's very um, established in the centuries, that you wait until confirmation for the child to take the Eucharist. But there's also the idea of pedo communion, which is practiced in the East. So, Eastern Orthodox, for example, practice this.
Hmm.
And with this, the child begins taking the Lord's Supper as soon as they're baptized, because they are equally members of the body of Christ, and they grow into understanding what they're consuming. But ultimately, they are taking in the body and blood of Christ. Because Anglicanism has its roots in the earliest centuries of the church, um, we are able to access these different traditions, and different churches can decide on which way they want to go. In our parish, we do encourage folks to participate in pedo communion, and it's really a beautiful thing to share the Lord's Supper with these little kids, and
I
they
feel
are
like it would, yeah.
being
That's
catechized in it.
something that I've been really kind of feeling led to, just personally. This is very much a
Yeah,
side note. Yeah, like my oldest, the last several times it happens, he's like, "Dad, please, like, can I do that with you all?" And I'm like, why? why would I say no and keep him from that? Like, that's a
Yeah.
grace. That's a benefit. Like, why would I say no to that?
Yes. And it's not just about, oh, you don't fully understand what's happening, because how many of us do fully
Yeah.
understand what we're participating in?
Or are
You're
perfectly
growing in.
walking in blah blah blah, like obedience and like fully living out all, like, it's like, yeah, I think you probably can't. Like the last
Yeah.
several times I'm like, I think soon.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. One thing I've loved about being in the Anglican communion, and yeah, I guess I should specify this book is not an Anglican book that I've written here, but we're
Sure.
talking specifically about my experience in church. Um, but I have loved that in the Anglican tradition, there is a real desire to focus on the essentials and non-essential questions like what we're talking about here. There is a degree of flexibility. I mean, there are people in our church who uh, prefer to wait to have their kids baptized until later, until they're at an age where they can understand what's happening. And while we encourage, and as an Anglican deacon, I encourage people to have their children baptized as infants. There is room for flexibility depending on people's convictions. So while we do practice paedo communion, it's not forced on anyone to do. They're
Sure.
welcome to make that decision ultimately for their family.
Yeah, no, I grew up, it was pretty strong. You don't do this until you're baptized, and you're not baptized until like you're at least, is basically, yeah, like a non-traditional confirmation, like until you can kind of be instructed, communicate that for yourself and like make your own public proclamation.
Yes, yes, yeah. So, um, yeah, and one thing I've learned is that confirmation that happens. That is your time for that public proclamation. So it's almost like your baptism is in a sense uh, sealed. It's the capstone of something that's happening where you're now affirming that baptism with your
Nice.
confirmation. So yeah,
Well, yeah, every now and then that topic comes up, and it's from people from different backgrounds and things. I do always enjoy that. So,
yeah,
back to like your art. You said you're a professional artist.
I
Talk
am.
to
Yeah.
me. Like, were you drawn as a kid all the time? Like, how did you go from somebody who likes to draw to being a professional artist to, oh, I want to incorporate my faith into that?
Oh yeah. I'm sure most artists that are listening know that it is not a straightforward path to become a professional artist.
No, I don't imagine so. I only
Uh,
know a few who are like, yeah, I can live happily and comfortably off my art. Just like, I mean, a lot
yeah.
of us are just grinding away in our basements on our off time.
Yes. Um, so I guess I mean I drew as a kid. I like drawing cartoons and that sort of thing. And my first job was at age 15. I started working for a local newspaper here in Virginia, um, drawing cartoons. I think it was like a once a month thing. And it was just
Wow, and you got
very fun.
paid as a kid once a
Got paid
month?
as a kid
That's
and got
great.
published. And I said, I want more of this. So did the whole college
I'm
newspaper.
sure you do. Do you remember like your first strip or whatever?
Let's see, what was it? I think it was a single panel cartoon, kind of Far Side style,
Nice.
and, I can't even describe the joke now. I'm not even sure if it was a good joke, but it was my attempt to be Gary Larson from the Far Side, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There you go.
Um, that sort of humor, that sort of style. Um, in college, I worked for the college newspaper. That was a lot of fun, and I mean, I studied business in college, believe it or not, and tried a marketing job and was just didn't enjoy it at all. And I decided before I fully succumb to a typical office job, I'm going to at least try to do something with art. So I drove to every local paper in the state of Virginia. I mean, I really did.
Whoa.
I made a list and I just took 5 or 6 long road trips. I walked in with a portfolio of stuff and I just said, "Hey, I'm building a little personal syndicate. Would you print my cartoons every week?" And I built up about 12 papers.
Wow.
I got turned down so many times, but for several
Sure.
years,
That's part of the story, right? Part of
oh
the
yeah,
grind.
people would be like, "You drove how far to ask me what?" Um, but yeah, I drew a weekly cartoon for years, and it went fine. I won awards through the Virginia Press Association, but it never made that much money, and I kind
Sure.
of wanted to
I'm
move on with my
familiar.
life. Yeah. So I worked as a web developer for a while and worked as a cartoonist on the side, and that's when, as working as a web developer at a local university, Virginia Commonwealth University, this cartoonist who I had met while I was drawing cartoons, um, he contacted me and he said, "Hey, look, I'm looking to retire, and I'd like to maybe hand over some of the work of my comic strip over to you." And over the years, as we worked together, he handed me more and more of the responsibilities of that comic strip. And so now I draw his old comic strip.
His joke. So, like, are you writing the jokes too, or just illustrating them?
I've got several joke writers, and they're
Nice.
guys with uh, with some immense experience in joke writing for politicians and for late night TV shows back
Very
in the
nice.
'80s and the '70s. I mean, they're veterans of the comedy world, and so I work with them. They send me a batch of jokes every week. I review them and go through them with my with the lady who essentially owns the comic strip. She's the widow of the original
So this is really
cartoonist.
a team effort here.
This is a team effort, but the artwork's something that I put together, and it's 7 different comic strips a week, full color. So it's a lot of work. It's
Wow, every day. Okay.
yeah, one every day.
Are these web deals? Or are they published? Are they both web comics that are published in various publications? Or
Well, the comic strip is called Shoe. It was originally drawn by Jeff McNelly, and it's he was a Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist back in the '70s. Drew from the '70s till the
shoot, I'm
early
trying. Like,
2000s.
I'm a big comics guy. I like strips, but I
Yeah.
mean, I know the very popular ones. Like, I don't know. Like, there's comics and then there's strips, and like sometimes like the comic strip people are like, oh, like you guys don't know. It's like, okay, no, like I know. I'm obviously a big fan of Peanuts. I've read nearly all of them. I love the all these
I
big
love
companies are doing
Charles
reprints
Schultz.
of everything. The Schultz Museum actually randomly just responded to me on Instagram the other day. I'm trying to get some people over there just to do something with. I don't know. Like, his legacy is very impactful to me.
Same, yeah. Him and Bill Watterson
Oh yeah.
are, yeah, so inspiring to me. Yeah, so yeah, this comic strip that I draw, it's been around since the '70s, and the original cartoonist died. He passed it to a friend of his, and that friend of his is the one who contacted me and said, "Hey,
Wow.
I'm retiring. Will you help me with this comic strip?" So, yeah, I think if you were to
So
Google
what are
it,
your succession plans when you get tired of it or want to retire? Have you eyed
good
some
question.
young cartoonist to be your protege for that one?
Time will tell. Time will
She
tell.
will
It's
go on forever.
hopefully so. Yeah, it's in newspapers around the country. So, and it's online. So,
I will absolutely be looking that up. That's
yeah,
great. So
it's
that's your
great
day
fun.
job.
That's my day job. Yep. And it gives me time to listen to a lot of audiobooks, do a lot of personal study while I'm drawing, which has been a huge blessing because it's sort of like whatever my imagination is interested in that day while I'm working on this comic strip, I can get a lot of study done. And
Was it like
so, yeah.
usually like a 3 or 4 panel type deal, or is it one of the bigger ones?
Yep. So on Sundays it's bigger because in the funny papers
Sure.
on Sundays that's the big day for
Oh
big
man, I
comic
used to love
strips.
that as a kid.
Yeah. Um and yeah, a lot of people don't read the newspaper anymore, but they're all those comic strips are still being printed and somebody's reading them because they're still they're still
I'm
out
glad
there.
about that. We
Yeah.
just had our man, it's really sad. I just saw a headline. I don't know when it will officially happen, but the giant building of the Kansas City Star is getting turned into some sort of AI farm or something like that. It
Oh,
was it
that's
was terrible to read. I didn't even finish reading about it.
that's the
So
worst case scenario.
yeah, it's like, man, we still have a lot of very
Mm,
cool local publications, but I know a lot of big newspapers. They just got so big and then couldn't stand the overhead. So I'm very,
yeah.
whenever I meet somebody in publishing, I'm like, bless you. Like, please keep going.
Yes. I'm hoping that there will be a renewal of appreciation for having
Yes.
that local paper that prints your local news. There's something about being committed to a specific place and being interested in what's going on in that community. I think it is such a good antidote to the anxiety that we feel in our constant doom scrolling, where we're just getting constant news from all over the world that we can't do anything about. And a local newspaper, it can remind you that you're a physical person, a finite physical person. You can only interact with so many things. And some of the things we should be thinking about most are right next door, not on our Twitter feed. So
Absolutely. Could not agree more. As you were specifically doing the research and compiling for the, well, I mean, so is a lot of the stuff from this book, I haven't like cross reference it, but a lot of it looks familiar. Um, did you create new stuff specifically for this book, or did you take a lot? Because I mean, I definitely recognize some of these.
yeah.
Like, did you take the bulk of it from your account that you've been working on for the last 3 4 years?
Yeah, so there are a few instances of people who I drew for the book that had not yet been featured on the Instagram account. But for the most part, these are entries that were on the Instagram account.
Okay, that's what I was
And I
thinking.
took with every Instagram post for Our Church Speaks, I post a picture and then I also post a biography of that saint. And for the book, I fleshed those biographies out more. And I also went back and made sure that I could footnote everything. Because part of my
We
hope is,
thank you for that
yes,
so much.
that was important to me because my hope is that this book will just be a gateway for people to begin their own study and exploration of getting to know these saints more. And you can't really do that without footnotes. If I'm just saying, "Hey, take my word for it. This is the story," then
Well,
yeah.
if you said just, "Hey, take my word for it," a lot of, people from church backgrounds would be familiar with that, that MO, but we do appreciate, cited sources. As you've been doing this over the years, how do I wanna ask this question? I guess, like, you get people from all over, I would imagine, engaging with your work and your art. You've amassed a good following over the years.
Yeah.
What have been some of the interactions, shares, encouragements, pushbacks that you've received from maybe um, folks who have made an impression on you? Like what have you put out on your account, or if you share any stories maybe where you put something out and you're like, oh, like that was a really interesting interaction from XYZ person or group of people.
Yeah, I have loved the way that this project as a whole has challenged me and challenged other people. So, as far as challenged me, I hear from people all over the world who are reading this content and they want to tell me their stories about their individual um, church traditions and the beauty maybe of their liturgy or the beauty of their worship. And wow, I've gotten so much of an inside look into so many beautiful ways that Christians around the world in various languages are worshiping every week. And that just it it takes my breath away sometimes just to see how many different contexts there are where God is working. It's so much bigger than the just the Southern Baptist circles that I grew up in. That's one place where God's working, but it's not the only place. And yeah, it challenges other people too, though, because I have seen people processing the fact that I am posting people of a variety of different denominations, and I'm presenting them as all part of the body of Christ. And some people want to maybe elevate their particular tradition most. And so presenting all of these folks as all part of the body of Christ, I can tell from the comments and from some of the messages that I get that, yeah, this is making people think, it's making people question some assumptions that they've made. And, and I think that's really good. I think it's creating good conversation as well as just putting content on the internet, and
I
hopefully
love
helpful
that.
content. Hopefully
Yeah, no, I
helpful,
mean,
conversations.
yeah, whenever I share it, it's again, I think I said something like this towards the top of our conversation. When you just get at the heart of these truths, these very simple truths, like the substance, if you will,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I have people from all over the spectrum. A lot of folks seem to react very positively to me personally when I share these. Sometimes,
Oh,
like,
good.
I'll pick and choose the environments that I share various things because, like, I personally don't care
Mhm.
about like having somebody be like, "Oh, I don't agree with that." I'd be like, "Enjoy, like that's fine if you
Yeah,
don't agree."
yeah.
But it's nice that like yeah, the heart of these tenets, especially that are just based on like piety and integrity and service and justice and these very basic universal things. I appreciate that quite a lot, having something that I can share that will remind people who may be disillusioned or hurt or whatever that no, like this is the heart of it.
Mhm.
Whether you wherever you end up or whatever wherever you are in your journey, that this is the heart of it, not maybe some of those other things that you see out there.
Yeah, that's really true. Um, do you mind if I talk a little bit? This is sort of touching on it, but, sort of the process I go through when I'm drawing these people.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite parts of the whole project. One thing I'm trying to do in drawing a lot of these portraits is to challenge people's assumptions that they make when they approach church history. Um, Especially here in the West, when we imagine a saint like Saint Augustine, for example, we immediately think of beautiful works of art that were made in Western Europe that depict Augustine as a Western European. And there's many saints like that. And
Yeah.
one thing I'm trying to do is try to better understand who are these people exactly, and what people groups do they come from, what culture do they come from. And so I've really enjoyed there's different ways that I've done this, but I'm trying to base their faces on people who are from those people groups that these different saints are from. And let's say, for example, there's someone from the second century in Egypt. I'm not going to be able to know exactly what they looked like, but I can maybe look up how were people depicted in art in Egypt in the second century. And actually, there's some really lifelike portraits of people from Egypt from that period of time. And what they show is that these were not Western European looking people. St.
No.
Anthony did not look like he was from Germany, despite the fact that he's often depicted that way in Western art. And so being able to push my own limits of understanding and challenge myself has made this art project and the process of doing the portraits and choosing the clothing that I put these people in, um, all of that has been extremely exciting to me.
Well, I also really appreciate like it is like in the school of the icons, but they are like in that style. There is also like a realism isn't exactly the right word, but they look like people. not like an idealized form of a person. Like, you have your own style as an artist,
Yeah.
but when you look at them, you're like, that's a human person, not that is a divine representation. Like, I love classical art and
Mhm.
Christian art, like these portraits. And
As do
actually,
I.
this was so weird. Recently, I was checking our analytics, and our man from like early in the show, we did an episode on the prodigal son, and I just used one of the old classical paintings of the prodigal son, so I just reshared that. We had a bunch of people listen to that episode, so I shared that, and I was going back and looking at some of the art for like these famous Bible stories and depictions. Like, I love looking at that sort of art. Like, that's beautiful, but also that's not that's not real, and not that it has to be. It's
Uh-huh.
got value, but I also do for the purpose of part of the goal and the thrust of your work is bringing like the global historical church to people, presenting them as like you are in the, like, this is your family. Like you said, I love, like you said, the family portrait or the family photo album. Like,
Yeah.
your people look like people, and that's I love that.
Yeah. A fascinating thing about Christian art, is that over the centuries, there has built this tradition of ways to communicate spiritual truths by maintaining a certain consistency in,
Sure.
say, iconography, for example. Everything from facial expression to the way people hold their hands to the way that their eyes are directed to, you name it. For specific saints, there are traditions that have been passed through the centuries. For example, for Saint Paul, there has been a tradition that's developed that he's always depicted as someone who's balding. He never has a full head of hair. And so all these different traditions that have been passed down, I try to understand what they are and try to carry some of those things over while maintaining my own style, because I think that those traditions, that artistic heritage that's been passed down, it matters. And I'm not trying to say that I am myself making icons. I try to specifically make clear that they're not icons, because
Sure.
icons are a very specific thing that deserve to be respected and not have their toes stepped on. Um, but I am very inspired by this legacy that's been passed down through the centuries, and am trying to honor that legacy by incorporating some of those symbols and that knowledge that's been passed down in my art as well. So yeah,
So no, this is a wonderful resource, and came out in time for the holiday season.
yeah. Actually, it came out right before All Saints Day,
There you
which
go.
was on purpose.
That is perfect. And at
Yeah.
least for a while, you guys were hitting a lot of the. I saw you guys were trending and number one on Amazon for a little while. Y'all had a nice little rollout.
Yeah, it was so great. Yeah, number 1 in history of Christianity, category, and, it was in that category just a few days ago. It tends to bounce around, you know how it
Sure.
is. But
We'll
the,
see what we can do for the holiday
yeah,
season to
yes.
keep it up there highly.
Um, and yeah, the reception of the book has been so encouraging. I've heard so many people say that the book has meant a lot to them and has even, encouraged them in their faith, which is, I mean, what more could we possibly want, than for that to happen? We also just today got notice that we, won a, IVP Reader's Choice Award,
Yeah, I saw that.
which was
Congratulations.
such an honor. Yeah, so it's, it's being well received out there. It's great.
That's fantastic. And is this your first like published book?
Yeah, for the most part, I would say, and,
Because I know you've been a part of a lot of publications, but
yeah, I've been part of other publications, but this is really the first one that, yeah, that's had a publisher putting it out, not a self-published thing.
and where you
Um,
were like engaged in the entire thing.
exactly. Yeah.
Well,
So
that's a heck of a start. Way
it's
to
been great.
go.
It's been great. Yeah, I'm
Are
really
your parents
grateful.
still around?
Yes, uh-huh.
So what did they think of the book?
Oh, they love it. They've gotten a bunch of copies. They pass it around. I give them promotional material, and they're my best salespeople. So yeah, it's
There
great.
you go. That's so great. And are they with you in the Anglican tradition, or have they found another home?
No, actually, they are back in a Southern Baptist church, believe it or not, and I love that they're involved there. And my dad's a deacon too, so he's a Baptist deacon. I'm an Anglican deacon, and we sit around and talk about deacon stuff now. So it's
There you
great.
go. Well, that's exciting, man. No, Ben, this is a really wonderful book, and I appreciate you coming and just kind of sharing the story. Like, I love following the page, but it's nice to kind of really look at these things, and I'm excited to get the episode out also too. Like, this would make a really wonderful gift for somebody or like a small group. I know it's set up like a weekly devotional. Like, I'm very excited. Like, I've seen a lot of these before on your Instagram, but I'm excited to kind of spend some time with these and hopefully chat with some other folks who are doing the same thing.
Yeah, I am grateful to have been able to talk with you about the book and the project. It's been a lot of fun. If you enjoy the Instagram account, you can go to ourchurchspeaks.com, and there's some more information about the project, as well as my co-author and I have recently started a podcast called Our Church Speaks. So we talk about the individual saints that are in the book. We give some context, so we tell stories. We just have a good time. So there's a lot of extra things that we're doing in addition to the book and the Instagram account. But yeah, Dan's such a good friend. We've now been at Redeemer Anglican together for 8 years, working together,
Wow.
and yeah, it's been a joy doing this with him. He's a founding pastor of this church, but he's also just a really good counselor, and he's applied that counseling expertise to writing the devotional material. And yeah, it's not only a history book because of him. It's also uh, just it's a way of applying the wisdom of the past to our lives in the 21st century, which is so great.
Absolutely. I love that. And before do the plugs and let you go, I want to do our one segment, Ben, substance shout out. So you're an artist and you said you get a lot of time while you're creating to do listening to various things. So what have you been engaging with, consuming, whether it's watching, listening to, reading, what have you? What have you been taking in that you've been edified by or even just found enjoyable and worthwhile that you want to commend to some folks? You can do a handful of variety of things if you like.
Well, I do love reading. I do love audiobooks as well.
Hmm.
But as you're drawing, you can't hold a book up and read at the
Sure.
same time. So audiobooks are fantastic. Um, Gosh, I would say this. Uh, there are a number of books that I have read that have really been paradigm shifts for me as far as making me rethink church history, rethink my relationship as a Christian to Christians from the past. Um, One of them is called Lost to the West. And this is a really great book by Lars Brownsworth or Brownworth. And it's basically the story of the Eastern Roman Empire, which is a
Okay.
center for where a lot of church history happens. And we just uh, in the West, there's been a real prejudice towards Western European history, but I would say so much of Christian history does not make sense unless you understand Eastern Christian history. So that one's great. There's also another book. Let me see if I can pull it up here. How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind. Really great book by Thomas Oden. And I listen to a lot of audiobooks while I work. So,
Sure.
these
Same.
are books that have just, uh, they've expanded my imagination, and they've challenged presuppositions that I had that I just assumed about what church history was. So those are really great. I've enjoyed both of those a lot.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And what do you fill your podcast time with when you're drawing?
Podcast time. I love a variety of different podcasts by a variety of different folks who are from different denominations. And I try to keep it mixed up,
I like it.
so that every episode's from a different perspective. I love Gavin Ortlund's podcast,
Okay.
which is fantastic. There's another one called well, there's a whole series of podcasts from uh, Ancient Faith Radio, which is an Eastern Orthodox podcast network. Um, they're always producing things that I enjoy so much. Um, and then we have our Anglican podcast. There's one called the Classic Anglican Podcast, which I always enjoy. Um, but yeah,
The
these are
Classic
just
Anglican Podcast. That's got to be for your audience. That's got to be perfect SEO for like the folks who are on that wavelength.
yes, that one's very specific to our denomination. But yeah, there's so many. I'm constantly listening to podcasts. So, and of course, the Substance podcast is incredible.
Wow. Well, thank you, sir. I didn't even pay him for that.
Yeah,
Are you a music guy or a movie guy at all?
love music. Yeah, love music. Love movies. Yeah, with music, uh, I've always loved classical music. It's always resonated with me. Jazz is so influential. The songs of Bob Dylan, I've they probably exist bigger Bob Dylan fans, but I haven't met them yet. And
I love
yeah,
Dylan. I regularly have to remind my wife that he is still currently with us. But yeah,
and
one of our greatest songwriters of all time.
and mysteriously, he has surfaced on Twitter,
Yeah,
writing his own tweets now. So I don't know what to make of that. And he's not really saying
especially
anything.
now.
He's not saying anything profound. It's just like, hey, I went to this restaurant and it was great, and I plan to go again.
Yeah, he's the guy who reliably, it's like, wow, he is still cranking out work and he absolutely doesn't have to.
Yeah, yeah. Which I think there are artists like Dylan that have really helped me get over my tendency to micromanage my
Hmm.
work. Because one thing about artists like Bob Dylan is he writes music because he has to write music. Like that's what he does. And he will churn out lyrics,
He has tried
and then he
so
will
many things in
yes.
so many genres and in so many, and honestly, still some of the stuff he puts out now is phenomenal. Some of it, I'm like, why is he still doing this?
Yeah. He's literally throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, and he'll write a song and then he'll rewrite it and he'll release that again. It's just always churning out music, churning out lyrics, and there isn't this sense that he's trying to create the perfect finished version of something that he's finally ready to show people. It's more like,
Just a machine. He can't stop doing it.
yeah, you kind of become part of his creative process just by engaging with his music. And for me, like I can be a perfectionist. And one thing I thought about with Our Church Speaks is I don't want to release this stuff till it looks perfect, till everybody sees it.
Yeah.
You know, and one thing I challenged myself from the beginning was you're going to give yourself 2 hours max to draw this portrait, and then you're going to put it online. And no matter how bad it looks, just put it out there. And that process of doing that, and then later I'll revise it if I don't like it, but it's out there. And people have seen portraits that I'm really proud of, and they've seen portraits that I've put out there that I am really embarrassed by. But it's that process of just continually cranking out creative content. I think once you start doing that, some really good stuff is produced, but you kind of have to have the humility to have people see you, warts and all. And I think artists like Dylan, they they kind of embody that, at least for me. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. Well, Ben, thank you again for your time. I've very much enjoyed following you over the years. I was excited to see that the book was announced, and I'm very very excited to see the reception it's already gotten. And yeah, this is a gorgeous book. And I told you off air before we started, one of my favorite things about it, like in the design, Kaitlyn Schiess, former and future guest, host of the
Yeah.
Holy Post, she always talks about how she hates dust jackets. I'm very much in the same way. This is like beautifully like printed on to the hardback book, so you don't even have to be like, oh no, I'm gonna lose this cover image or anything. This is primo.
They yeah, IVP did such a good job producing the book. I cannot thank them enough. They did beautiful work.
Well, could not agree more. Well, thank you so much, Ben. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This has been so much fun. We've talked about a lot of things in this interview, and I've enjoyed all of it. So, yeah, thank you for your time and for having me on.
Well, that was a really fun time talking with Ben. I love speaking with artists and people who take their life and ministry seriously. So check out his account if you haven't yet. Check out Our Church Speaks over from IVP. We're going to have the bookshop.org link in the show notes. It's a great gift. It's a great small group resource, and it's just a great resource for yourself. I very much enjoyed just going through this myself. The art is great. And if you are looking to kind of reclaim and just solidify your sense of faith that we are a part of something bigger and greater and larger, and not just something very small and controlled and finite. This is a really wonderful resource for that. So thank you, Ben. Thank you, IVP. This is wonderful. I would imagine keep an eye on the socials in the week or so following this. We'll probably be giving away at least a copy of this. This is a great book, and they sent us a few. So check the socials for that. If you love the show, leave us a review. And we would also really love to hear from you. If you have a book or a film or an author or activist or a minister, somebody who's doing something of substance in your community or in the wider community that you love, and you're like, hey, I would really love to hear someone talk to them for an hour, reach out, let us know, and we'll see if that makes sense and see if we can make that happen. Also, the best way to support the show, if you like it, is to share it. Text it to a friend, post it in your Slacks or Discords, or share it on your socials, wherever you communicate with folks. If this is something you like, tell other people about it. Also, you could write us a review on Apple, or I think more apps now, depending on where you're listening. You can hit the 5-star button. I just recently got into Pocket. I'm dipping my toe into Pocket Casts, and if you listen there, you can hit 5 stars. So all those things are helpful for us. And if you have a couple bucks and you want to just say thanks, give us a little holiday tip, you can do that over at Cash App at $ the Substance Pod. Or if you want to become a recurring member and where you give us, I believe it's $1, $5, or $10 a month, you can do that on the Spotify link in the show notes. Tune in next week. So we're not going to take 2 weeks off. Tune in next week for a substantive cinema episode. This is one that I'm so excited I got to do. Next week, we will be covering The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou with Dan McCoy of The Flophouse. Wes Anderson is somebody whose work is important to me, and The Life Aquatic is a top 3 on any given day. It's potentially my favorite. This was a wonderful conversation, and Dan is somebody whose work I've enjoyed for so long in various forms. Love The Flophouse. Really enjoyed The Daily Show back in the day. And this was just a wonderful conversation with somebody who's very smart and very funny, and we go deep on it. And it was a wonderful conversation, and I'm very excited to finally share that all with you next week. So tune in then. I have been your host, Philip Marinello, and we will see you next time on The Substance.